Hello, I'm Portia Young. Welcome to the June edition of 1036 here on Milwaukee PBS. In this episode, we'll head out to the Horicon Marsh with our friend John McGivern, and we'll introduce you to a local barber whose impact goes beyond the barber chair. We begin, though, with a visit to Cuba. Under the Obama administration, Cuba and the United States restored diplomatic relations in July of 2015. However, the U.S. embargo on Cuba, which was declared in October of 1960 after Cuba nationalized American-owned oil refineries on the island, hindering full normalization. Our Milwaukee PBS colleague, Raul Galvan, a native of Cuba, visited the island in January and May of this year. He reports on what's happening on the island since the Obama changes and offers his personal reflections on returning to his homeland.
To this day, I get a feeling of excitement and anxiety as my flight flies over Cuban territory. I'm amazed at how much the rich Cuban farmland sits fallow, many fields covered in marabou weeds. And as I head towards the hotel, I get that funny feeling of homecoming.
I was born here many years ago and left as a child, and returned for the first time at the age of 49 in 2000. Since then, I've come to Havana at least 8 times, and I was asked to do this to see if I could see any change after the Obama relaxations and rule between the two countries.
What some have called normalization of relations between the two countries was achieved by President Obama in December of 2014. Although far from normalized relations, the changes were more of a relaxation of the long-standing animosities between Cuba and the United States. The United States reopened its interest section in Havana as the embassy, made it possible for American air carriers to fly to Cuba, cruise ships to dock in Cuba, and it allowed some American companies to do very limited business in Cuba. It also relaxed travel restrictions. In May, I traveled to the island with a group of friends. We visited my hometown of Havana and the western provinces. The streets of my Havana are relatively unchanged from the days of my childhood. And a trip to my old neighborhood brings back memories. The facade of our apartment building, the corner grocery store, my grandmother's apartment around the corner with a distinctive iron work on the balcony.
To the naked eye, not much has changed in reality. There's still fewer cars on the streets. There's lots of the old cars on the street which are not environmentally friendly. Transportation is still a huge problem for many Cubans who do not have a car. Food is still at a shortage, although I'm told that no Cubans go hungry.
With every trip comes new experiences. This year, it was a visit to tobacco country in the west end of the island. En route, there was a stop at Las Terrazas, a planned community built by the Revolution and designated a biosphere reserve by UNESCO in 1984. Its early residents helped to plant new trees to reforest the adjoining mountain range. Also on the western jaunt was an overnight at the bucolic Viñales Valley, where limestone formations called mogotes accented the landscape. We also got a crash course in tobacco growing from Mr. Montesinos, a tobacco grower outside of Viñales, and toured the drying barns.
Entonces, para hacer un tabaco, se le retira el nervio central.
So, in order to make a cigar, you just take away the center stem of the leaf.
Vamos a utilizar las dos partes.
And then you use both the two sides then of the leaf.
Entonces se va a hacer, para esta hoja se van a utilizar dos tabacos. Uno izquierdo, otro derecho.
Oh, there will be one cigar that is going to be on the right, and one is going to be on the left,
¿Ve? Según la posición de los nervios.
depending on the position of the nerves of the stems.
Sombrero.
And then we put in the final part, which is called the hat.
Muy importante. Porque es que le va a dar el terminado.
Because will be the finishing part, like the real aesthetic of the cigar.
So you cut both ends when you're smoking them? No, just the head part. The other
Y-
one is
He'll
open.
let
It's
you
open.
know.
The other
Y
one is
dentro de una semana,
just a tad. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
dentro de una semana, está listo para fumar.
And in 1 week, it will be ready to be smoked.
That's great.
I like it.
We also visited the provincial capital, Pinar del Rio City. Population around 190,000, Cuba's 10th largest city. It's a far cry from Havana, but a nice respite from Havana's hustle and bustle. Cuba has been welcoming tourists from around the world since the early days of the Castro Revolution in 1959. But one of the changes I noticed on my trips this year has been the increase in travelers from the United States. Most of these travelers are going to Cuba on people-to-people educational trips, one of the 12 categories under which Americans are allowed to travel to Cuba. Even though there was a spike in American travelers after the December 2014 announcements, interest has leveled off. In January, I accompanied a class from the UWM School of Architecture and Urban Planning, led by UWM adjunct professor Michael Martin.
Problems that places like Camilo Cienfuegos, Ciudad Camilo Cienfuegos, and Alimar, which is just up the road and has further problems with this, is the social isolation away from economic support systems.
Martin's class took students to neighborhoods throughout Havana and the outskirts and provided a rare opportunity to visit CUHI, the Architecture and Engineering College of the University of Havana.
A very famous architectural historian said that the TV killed the porch, because now people sit inside and watch TV all the time. But the porch was obviously a focal point of a lot of the architectural design.
What I call the contradiction of Cuba continues to persist. Tourism and activities related to tourists continue to thrive. There's been an explosion in the number of paladares, private restaurants located in people's homes, which have raised the quality of food on the island. In my travel to the island in the early 2000s, there were very few dining options and only a handful of dependable paladares. In 2017, however, paladares are thriving. While the food options for tourists multiply, the options for the Cubans themselves, however, have made little or no progress. With a finite amount of food produced and imported on the island, the Cubans find themselves struggling to put meals on the table.
At the home of Ernest Hemingway, folks, on the other side of the Havana Bay in a small town called San Francisco de Paula. And it just goes to show you that there has been long and deep connections between the States and Cuba, and that as a kid, I experienced many American influences, everything from watching The Lone Ranger on TV to going to Woolworth's downtown Havana, and watching the Globetrotters out at the Ciudad Deportiva. So, Finca Vigía, Ernest Hemingway's home. We're in the town of Regla, across the harbor from Old Havana in the city of Havana. You see Old Havana in the background, as well as the little launch that takes people across the bay every day.
Regla, on the east side of the Havana Bay, is accessible on the little ferries which leave the terminal throughout the day. It's a hotbed of Afro-Cuban religion and the home of the Black Virgin of Regla, who is venerated on the island, and whose image is associated with the Santeria goddess Yemaya, the Orisha of the ocean. Music is ever present on the island, whether in clubs,
If it ain't you, baby.
outdoor cafes, and schools. One of the highlights of our trip in May was meeting the talented students at the Escuela Paulita Concepcion in Centro Habana, where we enjoyed our own private concert. And on our last night, we enjoyed some Cuban-infused jazz at Havana's famed La Zorra y el Cuervo Club, with renowned Cuban drummer Yissy Garcia and her band. My last revelation of the May trip was the discovery of Fusterlandia, the home and neighborhood of Jose Fuster, a Cuban artist who in a little over 20 years has transformed his house and neighborhood into a fantasy land.
Final day here from Jose Marti International Airport in Havana. We're headed back home today and wanted to share some final reflections with you. It seems to me that President Obama's changes have begun to normalize the economy. Tourists have much more to choose from in terms of food, in terms of housing options. However, I think the plight of the regular Cuban, I've spoken to many friends who echo the same sentiment that, you know, things are very, very difficult. It hasn't gotten any better from them unless you're involved in the tourist economy, which can help you. But all in all, Cubans are still having a really drastic time. Moving forward, younger people are discouraged. They see very little hope coming up. You know, time will see what happens in Cuba in the next decade.
Raul joins us now to talk more about his recent visits and his impressions. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so let's start. We've heard more and more about American citizens taking that first trip to Cuba. And there's also something that President Obama did before he left office that seriously impacted Cuban citizens, correct?
That's right. Cubans had been able to come to the U.S. Under the Cuban Adjustment Act and stay. It was generally referred to as the wet foot, dry foot policy. Mm-hmm. So if you landed on land in the U.S., as the title implies, in a year you received full residency. But if you were interdicted on the water and you were sent back to Cuba. Mm-hmm. And that was basically a concession of Obama to the Cubans, who had been advocating for that change for a long time, and really angered many people in the Cuban American community in the States.
Okay, well, it seems like it's kind of dangerous, too, to have that
It created a lot of risk, and that was the argument of the Cubans, that it caused a lot of undue deaths in the sea.
Right, okay, so, well, we know it's been nearly 60 years since Fidel Castro took office, but 7 months since he passed away. So what will it take for the full normalization of relations between the two countries?
It's in anything dealing with Cuba is really complicated. From the Cuban side, I think it's safe to say that nothing will happen without the elimination of the embargo. Mm-hmm. The embargo that was imposed on the island back in the early 60s. Mm-hmm. There also needs to be a resolution of the Guantanamo base issue. The Cubans want that land back. They see it as an assault on their sovereignty, and they want their land back. From the U.S. side, the U.S. wants democratization of the island. They want free and open elections, not involving Castro's, but, you know, Raul will be retiring in 2018, so that shouldn't be a problem. And they also want a relaxation of the human rights abuses of the Cuban government, which are which are apparent and are a reality. To what degree is unknown, really.
President Trump has signaled that he may be changing things?
There has been a review of Cuba policy by several federal departments, and there's no one really knows what's going to happen. But among the things that are really disliked by the new administration is the fact that there are some American companies that are doing business in Cuba with military-owned enterprises, such as hotel systems. The Starwood hotel chain has signed a contract with Gaviota, which is owned by the military, to manage 2 or 3 new hotels or old hotels in Cuba. So that's a problem, and it's thought that the Trump administration wants to crank that back a little bit. There's also a concern about all the people that are traveling, and to some extent not really serving with the letter of the spirit of the law, which is that if you go, you have to be on a people-to-people educational trip, or one of 11 other categories, such as doing business with Cuba, providing humanitarian missions, et cetera, et cetera. So those two things are really in consideration. There's strong lobbying on the part of 2 Cuban American legislators, Marco Rubio, who is on the committee that's overseeing all the Trump and Russia connections, and Mario Diaz-Balart, who's on the Appropriations Committee.
Okay. So let's change gears here a little bit. Let's talk about Cuba and technology for a moment. In particular, Cubans and their cell phones.
That's one of the biggest changes that I didn't mention in the piece that we just saw. Cubans are fascinated with their telephones and have skipped, to a great degree, they skipped the computer or the laptop stage because, there were very few computers in Cuba. And so Cubans have free, it's not free by any means, Wi-Fi. There's Wi-Fi, and it's typically in parks. So you go around a park at night, in the middle of the night, and people will be all around, sitting around talking on their phones, or texting on the phones, or Skyping on their phones with their family abroad. So yeah, that's been a huge change since I went the first time.
Okay, lastly, quickly, let's talk about the new travel regulations and bringing back Cuban cigars.
All right, you can bring back unlimited number.
And rum?
And rum, all you want. So the only little thing is that you have to pack it in your suitcase when you hit American ground. So in other words, you can bring it in Cuba in your carry-on, but once you hit your American airport, it has to be put in your suitcase for some reason.
All right, so I won't ask. Do you have?
Oh, I have a fine selection.
All right. Thank you, Raul. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Portia.
You can check out some of Raul's photographs from his trips to Cuba on the 1036 page at MilwaukeePBS.org. From Cuba to Bayview now, Christopher Ortiz works at his family's barbershop. He has a particular frame of mind when it comes to cutting hair. He leaves his customers, his neighbors, with much more than a shave and a haircut.
You really have to know how to, psychologically and socially make people feel comfortable and relate to you and relate to them more. And not only that, but it's one of the few careers out there where you're physically touching people. So you have to have a really relaxed and kind of in control feel to your overall personality. And so it wasn't easy. My name is Christopher Ortiz, and I am a barber. I've been barbering now for 18 years. I work with my family, for my family. My father, Joseph Amado Ortiz, he's been a barber now for 54 years, I believe. I was working in landscape construction. I was a truck driver for a while. I would stop down and visit my dad at the barbershop, and I was kind of complaining about it. And my dad's like, well, if you don't, if you're having trouble looking for a job, why don't you just cut hair? And I was just like, I was kind of like, yeah. So here I am, 18 years later, and it feels like, I don't know how I got here. But it's definitely something that I love to do. I knew what it was like to be a barber, but but I didn't know how I personally would feel about being a barber. And the creativity of being a barber and the artistic value and the skill of being a barber, I think, is probably what I gravitated to mostly. That surprised me mostly. Probably the biggest selling point to me was the ability to really excel at a skill and perfect it.
This is a leather strap, and this is a little polish it all the way down. And you can see the hair pop off, so it should pop off just like that, see? That sharp.
A barber shop is definitely very in tune with the neighborhood, and you know, coming to a barber shop is a place where you should be able to confide, share pretty much anything you want. There's no holds barred, and it's like topics are brought up, you know, to the entire shop and are shared, and it's great because it's good to have, you know, camaraderie and open conversation, and it's kind of a neutral ground, and it's good. It's a good place to hear other people's opinions. So I feel like that's a barber shop.
So he came up to Racine because he knew that there was a lot of foundry and printing and stuff like that here, so he settled in Racine.
Barbershop is also like a place you can go to and find information. You know, barbers know everybody. Barbers are Renaissance people. You know, a lot of times barbers aspire to be other things. So. But also, you know, kind of bringing back the Renaissance thing. I'm a musician. I've been a musician for 25 years or so. It really ties in hand with barbering too, because a lot of opportunities for my music to be associated with other musicians or opportunities that come up, a lot of them come through the barbershop because I meet so many different people, and it's a very good place to connect. Being a barber to me is, I definitely feel like I am a person of the neighborhood. I feel like I have more of a moral and ethic responsibility because I'm dealing with so much of the neighborhood in the city, and you know, when people see me, like, there's the barber, you know, and I feel like it is somewhat my responsibility to put on a good role model and help out where I can. You know, I want to make sure that I'm in a good mood all the time, and I'm truly happy, and that's kind of how I want it too. Like, I really feel good about where I'm at, and we're really having a good time here, and I think that's one of the reasons that people come here, because they know they can come to Jose's, they know they can come to our shop, and they can just relax, get a haircut, and it's gonna be fun, and it's gonna be part of their day.
Our next segment puts us in a summer frame of mind as we head out to the Horicon Marsh and listen in on a conversation with John McGivern.
We're off.
So we just left your dock. So where are we right now?
We're traveling upriver on the Rock River.
And upriver means which way? West?
North.
North?
North, up
Rock
into the
River.
marsh, yeah.
Okay.
The one thing when people come out here, you can't tell how deep the water is by looking at it. So you got to know where you're going to keep from getting stuck in the mud.
And that happens?
Well, no. I never have to worry about that. Yeah, if we get stuck, and in this case, I have 4 volunteers that have to get off the push before I even think about it.
I have wingtips.
Captain is always the last to leave the ship, you know.
I have wingtips on.
So that's how that works.
Yeah.
So
well, there'll be 3 before me.
I've never had
so
to enforce the captain rule, but there could be a first time. So the marsh lies right here on the north side of town. The east and west branches of the Rock River drain into the Horicon Marsh here, and they supply it with water. So where they meet forms its headwaters, and this is then the same Rock River that empties into the Mississippi River in Rock Island, Illinois. The end of the marsh is 14 miles ahead of us from here. So there's a lot of marsh out here, and I tell every visitor that comes on a tour with me, you've really never seen the Horicon Marsh till you've been out in it by boat, because it's totally different out here than what you see by car if you drove around it.
Yeah.
It's totally different. All the plant life is growing naturally, none of it's been planted, and it's all providing habitat for birds and animals to live and raise their families along here. 305 species of birds have been documented here, so you mentioned that. People come from all over the world, all over the United States to go birding here. Birding is a hobby, it's a sport today, where bird watching is something you do when you have nothing better to do.
So are you a bird watcher?
Never.
You're a
Birder.
birder.
So there is a difference. when you're
You
touring
kind of
with,
snarled at me. I don't really appreciate that, Mark.
well, you're on a tour with me.
A simple pardon me would just do, okay? What did I ever do to you? Want to talk about my hobbies now?
Sure, sure. But you're always birding when you go on tour with me. We're never bird watching.
Never bird watching.
Can you see the gulls on the lampposts? See
Oh,
the
sure.
gulls?
Yeah.
But did you know there's no such thing as a seagull?
What is it?
So these are either herring gulls or ring-billed gulls. You can look in all the bird books in the world. You're never going to find a gull called a seagull.
Wow, I had no idea.
Most people don't. There's a great blue heron standing right up ahead of us, left side.
There
Heron
is.
standing there.
Look at him.
They are the largest of the herons that live in the marsh here. They have that two-tone blue-gray color.
Mm-hmm.
They have an uncanny ability to disappear into a shoreline like a ghost. Even when they're standing in the wide open, they can be hard to see there. It's a double-crested cormorant. Cormorants don't have the ability to waterproof their feathers like ducks and geese do. And if they stay in the water too long, their feathers get waterlogged, then they can't fly. That bird chattering up ahead of us there, heard that? That was a belted kingfisher.
Right there in the tree.
Right up here is a bald eagle.
Where?
Right up here. We've had a pair of bald eagles nesting here in the state wildlife area for the last 4 years.
There he is.
Got him there? Oh. So he just tucked in up there.
My.
This was the second year in a row where they raised triplets. So national average of birds per nested eagles raised are typically only one. So the fact that they raise triplets here tells me they're excellent fishermen and there's a good food source. There's a wood duck just flying away from us down there as well, right along the edge of the shore. But you can see here how the marsh opens up into some of the bigger open areas. It's not solid cattail throughout, as people might imagine. What's nice about coming out in the marsh, you can't get lost.
Why?
Folks get confused, never lost. In the 40 years that I've been a member of the Horicon Fire Department, I've only ever had to come out here on rescue missions twice. To look for people that got confused. They're always easy to find because you can hear them hollering for help. Easy to find.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
And there's 33,000 acres of it, so.
Is that right?
A lot of places you can get out and get away from it all.
It's amazing that this is in the middle of our state here.
Yeah, it's right here. Yeah. It's a well-kept secret sometimes, which I think is probably good sometimes too.
I'm going to put that on my list of places to visit this summer. That's it for this edition of 1036. Remember, visit MilwaukeePBS.org for more information about this episode and so much more. We leave you with some beautiful summer sights from Milwaukee's lakefront from above.